So we're going to move on to our second segment today. Get off Mr. Catanzara. Actually, before I get off that, I'm going to say one last thing. I'm starting to get that queasy feeling that this body cam footage may not show what Mr. Catanzara and the Chicago Police Department and Mayor Lightfoot thinks it does. They're like interesting language they have used on whether or not Adam Toledo had a gun or the gentleman he was with had a gun, in a way that's kind of getting tossed around and trying to deflect. I'm a little worried that this video is going to come out and not show what the department's hoping it's going to show. So anyways, on to the second segment. So we're going to talk about, I think, an op-ed. Yeah, it's an editorial in the Sun-Times. It's not an op-ed. It's an editorial in the Sun-Times. The title is "Another Good Argument for Dealing with Low-Level Nonviolent Offenders in a Smarter Way." And I'll do something I don't often do. I'm going to agree with the Sun-Times editorial board. There's a recent report came out, published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, and I know about it because my wife's a PhD health economist, so I'm very familiar, and she published recently an NBER report. Now, this is not peer-reviewed, so I just want to give you that caveat. These are usually papers that are in the working process that are going to be submitted for peer review, but they're looking to get comments from scholars. The only people allowed to publish them are senior researchers that have a significant history of peer-reviewed writing. So there's a little trust built up into them and that it will be high-quality research. Excuse me. So it is that. But what they did is they basically found these researchers. I think they looked at 15 years of data. And I think this was in Boston, but don't quote me on that. They looked and basically saw that low-level offenders who were not prosecuted were less likely to reoffend than those that were prosecuted. Now, what does this mean for defunding the police and reallocating funds for the criminal justice system, whether it is the prosecutors, the courts, the jails, the police, all of it? Well, nationally, more than 80% of all criminal cases that proceed into the justice system are misdemeanors. And I agree with the Sun-Times editorial board, that does steal massive, massive amounts of police time in dealing with them. Maybe there's a better way. Maybe if we have an analysis of 15 years of data that's showing us that those results, if and when this gets peer reviewed, that's got to be replicated immediately. That is a massive finding. And that's just proves to us it is time to defund or redistribute it, and also bring in a crisis response system. Bring in an alternative response system like Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon, so that calls that don't require a person with a gun to show up go to crisis responders and not armed officers who don't need to be bothered by these things. Now, there's an initiative that's testing this. I think kind of an experiment with it, I think since 2018, but I think it only has to do with drugs. Now, as I had mentioned earlier about our nation meetings, one such nation project is studying the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon. Tim and Ebony from the Cahoots program were on the show earlier about late last year, I believe. So you can look that up if you want to learn more. One of our groups in the nation is studying how Cahoots operates, how it's been replicated around the country. Rochester, New York, I think San Diego. I know Denver they just published, and the There was just an NPR story about the 6-month experiment with it there and how well it went and how it's going to be expanded. We need to do this, especially if these numbers hold up through peer review. That is an amazing finding. And it's time to get police out of a lot of things and send a better response, a cheaper response, a less armed response, and one that may have better long-term outcomes. Now, people say, oh my God, you're going to talk about getting rid of police. I'm not. And I'm not even talking about not sending them everything we think may or has a good probability of containing violence or has had already violence as part of it. At least no one I'm working with is saying that. But from that threshold down to the simplest of calls is a huge number, right? And you can bet right now many, very high percentage of those 80% of misdemeanors have no violence in them. We're working on a study now with tens of millions of calls from the Office of Emergency Management and Communication, OEMC, what are called police calls for service. What do people call 911 for? 911 for we have it. We have them going back to 1999. We're working on a study going to ferret out how many calls that go to the CPD by district, by year, are for violence or have a high likelihood of violence occurring, and how many don't. And that's going to be the basis for our work with our work from the Nation Group on Cahoots about pushing for some alternative response. But we're going to use it, we're going to push for that using facts. Want to be part of that research? Join us tonight. The link for our Zoom meeting is in the chats. You can join us tonight at 7. Check out what the groups are about. There's a bunch of other groups made up in the nation that are doing research. Maybe you can jump on another project.